With a sustainability lens, let me start perhaps in a strange place, which is, as I've said in a previous session today, in the last 24 months, 100 million people have been put out of work, and $15 trillion worth of assets have been destroyed, and $5 trillion worth of public debt has been incurred in trying to solve the problem. And at the root of the problem was bad measurement. Also bad governance, also greed, but actually bad measurement allowed it to happen. Traditional credit ratings like Standards & Poor's and Moody's were measuring the wrong thing. Balance sheets were not being correctly constructed. Auditors were not understanding the valuations of derivatives. And this is not only about financial. This, 100 million people is a lot of people to be put out of work. This is about sustainability. And so we shouldn't just think about corporate responsibility metrics. We have to understand a much broader landscape of measures if we're interested in taking this seriously. Secondly, one of the most innovative indexes of corporate sustainability that has really driven a generation of work was the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And it was the mother of modern indexes, because for the first time, it didn't focus exclusively on impact. Did you do things good or did you do things bad? But it focused on the underlying business process, the way in which businesses understood risk, and even to some extent the way in which businesses managed innovation in relation to the potential for business transformation. Looking back now, there are many things one would say about the Dow Jones Sustainability Index that one would wish to improve, but actually it was the sort of original core business sustainability rating, and we've all drawn from it and learned from it. I think secondly, we've seen a generation of indexes emerge that were not only consumer-facing, but began increasingly to be investor-facing. And obviously, Sonia, you will talk about yours and the difference between kind of a consumer public-facing index and an investor-facing index is a really important piece to pick out. And the two examples we have here today really help to do that. But clearly indexes that have been built around stock exchanges, one of the early ones being the Dow Jones Index, that was fairly quickly followed by the so-called FTSE for Good, which was the UK London Stock Exchange. And actually that was then followed very quickly in South Africa. And South Africa has historically taken a real lead, both in the corporate governance area and in developing ratings linked to stock exchanges, which we've all learned from, I think, and kind of drawn inspiration from. I think the public indexes, there are hundreds of them, but they don't all say sustainability. One of the most interesting indexes I've seen, which in previous years I've been involved in, is the Great Place to Work Index, which is about the satisfaction of employees and how they understand the businesses or organizations that they're working for. Again, not normally thought of as a corporate responsibility index, but clearly, the situation of employees is, amongst the most important aspects of corporate responsibility. And actually, many corporate responsibility indexes either ignore it or underplay the importance of the situation of employees. One or two gaps, and then I'll stop. I think indexes have completely failed to come to terms with supply chain issues. There are some metrics that handle it, but there is no index that handles supply chain, social and environmental impacts effectively, number one. Number two, as we move in the sustainability area from a compliance orientation towards an innovation orientation, we see that most indexes are really focused on compliance and fail to capture insights into which companies have cultures of innovation that are likely to evolve their business models to a greater alignment with sustainability. A very difficult area to measure, but actually core to how we understand the next round of sustainability opportunities for change. I think thirdly, most of the indexes have been focused on publicly listed companies, but obviously the ones linked to stock exchanges, but also others. And that is failing to capture the experiences, particularly of companies emerging from countries like Brazil that are often not publicly listed and are not yet large enough to figure on the radar of global assessment. Yeah, so there's a whole new generation of companies that just are under the radar of the indexes that we're using. And one of the interesting pieces that has emerged to start with around the UN Millennium Development Goals, which we're now 10 years through out of a total of 15 years, something that Ethos has pushed very hard, is a growing call for companies to explain their performance relative to the big picture. Millennium Development Goals or national objectives, the sort of the micro to macro link. Is this company contributing a fair share, given what this nation needs to achieve? So these are blind spots, that are really not being covered by today's indexes. I hope that is fine. Thank you.
Eu já poderia fazer umas 2, 3 perguntas só para o Simon, mas eu vou fazer uma que foi a que foi a mais intrigante para mim, que você falou logo no início, de você acreditar que as métricas não podem ser estáticas, que elas têm que ser... Você não falou alguma coisa sobre isso? Que elas não podem ser paradas no tempo. Me dá um exemplo prático disso, na sua cabeça, como que isso funcionaria?
Yes, when we think about measures of environmental performance, there are sort of 2 easy examples. 10 years ago, nobody was measuring carbon emissions. Everybody was doing, at best, ISO 14000, which is a process performance management system, which is good for, very basic, environmental efficiency type measures in the production process, but has failed to capture many of the issues that we're now seeking to address. Second example, also in the environmental area, would be the shift from linear measures of environmental performance along a value chain to measures of closed loop. How far has a company progressed in closing the loop, in eradicating waste? And 5 years ago, actually, there were some interesting institutions that were trying to measure that, but they were all very marginal. And today, it's a mainstream story. And then, so that's to do with new understanding of what needs to be measured. Mm-hmm. Then there's the second piece, which is the exhaustion of an indicator, because people have worked out, frankly, how to cheat. Definitely. Yeah, and we've seen the dangers of that in the reporting area. Measures of the quality of reporting, we know it's reporting, but we use it as a proxy for performance. But companies have become very, very smart at reporting, so they score high, and yet that may not reflect similar developments in their underlying performance model.